President Yassine, thank you so much for joining us today and for coming here from Togo. So we just heard a little bit from President Kagame there speaking specifically about Rwanda, but when we think about Togo and some of the issues and the crises that are affecting your country, what is top of mind for you?
First of all, I want to say that I'm very happy to be at the second Doha Forum. It's the first time I'm coming, and I'm impressed by the quality of the conversations and the debates. Coming from Togo, the first issue that we do have, I will say two. I'll mention two issues. The first one is, as you know, the consequences of the succession of the crisis with the rising cost of living for our population. Talking about Togo, but it can be extended to West Africa. And the second one is the issue of security that we are facing in our sub-region, in West Africa.
Let's take those one by one then. Inflation specifically, what you mentioned, 6% just in the West African Economic Monetary Union. How are you addressing that?
You have to know that in what we call the West African Monetary Union, like French-speaking West Africa, we have a common currency, and usually we have inflation rates of barely 2%. Normally it's 1%. So for us, 6% is a lot. How are we facing? We are in the emergency. What we did, we capped the rising price for fuel and for wheat and for corn. I mean, the staple foods. That's what we have tried to do. But it will not be sustainable in the future because it costs us about $20 million every month, which is not sustainable for our finance. So we are trying to set up a new strategy for the mid and long term.
What does that look like? I mean, you mentioned it's not sustainable, so how are you addressing that at this point?
For the wheat, for example, what we are doing is we are introducing cassava flour bread. The bread that we eat right now was like 100% from wheat flour. Now 40% will be from cassava flour, so it reduces the amount of the subvention that we are giving. If you see the transportation, for example, for fuel prices, because we can't really target the poor people for the subsidies on fuel, because when you set a price, it's for everybody. So what we are doing now, since in our country, the most popular way of transportation is bikes, so now we are shifting to electric bikes, and we have inaugurated our first assembly plant for electric bikes in our country.
Do you see that having an impact more broadly on the country, on the economy, on various issues that the world is trying to tackle right now, climate even?
Say it again.
Do you see the transition to bikes and to electric bikes sort of having an impact?
Yes, it will have an impact.
How so?
Yes, it will have an impact because the fact that we know that the young people use bikes and they don't have that much revenues. They are usually poor, and you want to be able to subsidize those people who are vulnerable and who are poor. And the fact that you cannot do it by setting a price, you necessarily need to take them away from the use of fuel. And that's what we are doing by electrical. Because for a bike today, you buy a bike, but for electrical, today what we are doing, you buy a service. When you need the bike, you just use it, you pay something very little, and you leave the bike and you move on.
So is the government working with private operators then to make that happen?
Yes, yeah. We even have a factory in our industrial park for that.
Let's talk about the second issue that you mentioned, security. We know that there's been a lot of conflict happening in neighboring countries to Togo. How is that affecting what it is that you're trying to accomplish and the investment you're trying to bring into the country?
It's affecting it in, I would say, two ways. The first one is obvious, is the human lives that is taking. You know, it's a long story. It started with what happened in Libya in 2011, and it continued in Mali in 2012, Burkina Faso in 2016. In the meantime, it was in Nigeria and in Niger. Now it's threatening what we call the coastal countries, meaning Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Togo, and Benin. So apart from the lives that it's taking, it's also impeding our effort to attract investors because the perception of the risk is higher. So the cost of investment is also high. But we think that today, with the trend of the economy, with the disruption of the supply chains, normally you have a chance to, in our countries, to build integrated industries like textile. Today, in Togo, we are trying to set up 5 textile factories, and that started 2 years ago, taking advantage of the pandemic. You know.
Have you seen any of those returns at this point?
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's signed and it's being built right now.
Well, so then, I mean, still, the conflict is still happening, right? And so
in the north, it's far away so far.
Yeah.
It's far away. This what I'm saying. If we are building it now, it means that we signed the contract 2 years back. At that time, the security problem was further north, you know, in Mali and in Niger and other countries.
do you believe the Togolese people are better off today than they were maybe 5-10 years ago, considering the changes that you were trying to implement in the country?
Yes, I think
Tell us more.
the figures say it all in terms of revenues, in terms of GDP per inhabitants, in terms of health, security. I mean, you know, before the pandemic, our growth rate, generally speaking, in Togo and in the region was about 5%, 5.1, 5.5%. And I think this is the most obvious figure saying that the things were improving before the pandemic.
But it's still one of, people in the country are still some of the poorest in the world. So how do you continue to support them and to continue building up the fruitfulness, right, of the Togolese people?
For that, I can give you a simple example. When we were faced with the issue of the pandemic, you know that there's this debate on the confinement of the population where you put a lot of restrictions on the people. So because of the spread of the disease, what we did, we tried, because we couldn't have more debt, we didn't have the budget for that, we had limited resources. So what we did, we resort to technology. We say that given the limited resources that we have, let's target the most poor people. And we did it within, I would say, 3-4 weeks, you know, trying to give, to send money, send revenues through mobile payment to the most poor people in our country. Because those people were out of poverty maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, so they're still in a precarious condition. So those were the most threatened by the disease. They could go back to poverty. So by doing that, we help them stay out of poverty. That's an example that I'm giving. But technology also, we are trying now to use it for education, for health, water supply, with the technology of pay-as-you-go, and electricity. That's the way we are trying to target the poorest people in our country.
Do you think Togo is distinguished in terms of doing that, or do you see other countries doing something similar that you're trying to replicate?
In what we did for the revenues, we innovated in our region. But coming to water supply or electricity supply with solar power, I think it's something which you can see in other countries in our region.
And then just finally, when you think about global investment, you mentioned some of the issues that are affecting potential capital that's coming into the country. What is the message that you have sort of to global investors about why they should be investing in Togo?
Given the situation now, I think for us it's an opportunity for Togo and the West African countries. First one, as I said, is the disruption of the supply chain. Today, if you take, like I mentioned, the textile industry, I can say the same thing for soya beans. You have the farm in our countries, in Togo. You have the factory. You can transform everything and export it to the final market, to the consumer markets. You know, before what we used to do, we used to transform only 2% of our cotton production in West Africa. The cotton was sent to China, for example. The factories were there, and then back to US or European for the consumer market. Today we can extend the value chain in our countries, and from the cotton seeds to the final products in our country, and we are even closer to European and the US market.
And you're developing a port in Lomé as well, right?
The port is there, yeah. We are in West Africa, the main port, the main container port in West Africa.
Are you concerned about competitors potentially coming in and taking advantage of that opportunity?
Given the growth rate in the region, you have Nigeria has a great growth potential. You have Ghana, because Senegal. Today, Togo port is not only serving Togo, it's also serving the other countries. So competition is kind of stimulation for us. So we will do better with that competition. I hope so.
President Yassine Bey, my time is up, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very
everybody.
much. Thank you. Thank you.